In today's video, I'm gonna break down the science of the body when it comes to fat loss versus weight loss. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Paul Ravella from ProPhysique.com, and today's question came right from my Instagram direct message, and I feel like it's a great discussion to have because sometimes there can be confusion over people being excited about seeing the scale drop and not realizing that they haven't lost any body fat. No, they've just changed their body composition, and sometimes for the worse. So we're going to talk about a question I got. It goes just like this. What is the difference between weight loss and fat loss? I'm confused. And I think it's a great question because if you don't understand the physiology of the body type, right, of the different tissues of the body, mostly being fat cells and muscle cells, and to some degree, even some of the softer tissues like tendons and ligaments, which can change. And we'll talk about some ideas about like inflammation and glycogen and things like this that relate to the scale, because you're going to hear some exciting things when it comes to fat loss. So first thing I want to address is our champion from our last transformation challenge. If you look at him visually here, it is before picture, and you look at him visually here in his after picture, it looks pretty incredible, right? It looks like he probably gained several pounds of muscle and obviously lost a lot of body fat, when in fact, all he did was lose body fat. And the reason he looks so different is because body fat, or the adipocytes of a fat cell, reside in between our skin and our muscle. So when you have body fat, especially good amount of body fat, it blurs the definition and the separation. So if you look at like this right here, when I get shredded, you will actually not be able to see the body fat here. It will actually show much more depth and separation between my muscles. When you get striated in the shoulders, you can start to see like the divisions of the shoulder. You can see all the separation. And so when you see a picture of that or a video of that, it looks like, wow, this person gained a lot of muscle. When in fact, if you look at that picture of Dan, I believe he lost 30 plus pounds of body fat, and he's around 6 foot tall. And I think his after picture was like 152, 154 pounds. You have to listen to the podcast on the Pro Physique Code where I interviewed him. You can get those details. But the point is, this is something that I see pretty regularly, and it's a good question to ask. Are you losing weight or are you losing fat? So let's talk about the two main types of body tissue that I want to get into, and that is a fat cell and a muscle cell. A fat cell, I'll put a graphic on the screen here so you can see it. It's made up of some basic things like some mitochondria and all that stuff. But you'll notice when they show you a fat cell, it's very large. And the far majority of that fat cell is the fat reservoir, or the body fat that is stored in there. Now, a lot of times we'll hear things like, oh, I lost body fat. And you might think you have less fat cells. That's actually incorrect. What happens is that fat reservoir says bye-bye, and that fat cell basically shrinks to nothing, right? It's still there, and it's still able to add fat back to it. So this is why it's important when we're losing body fat, not to get the idea that we're losing fat cells. We're not. Our fat cells are kind of set for our life. There are a few extenuating circumstances where that can change. I'm not going to discuss that here. But for the far majority of us, what we're focusing on is getting rid of the fat in those fat cells. Now that fat is actually energy. It's not a bad thing. I think we have this association with fat as bad. Fat's actually great for us, okay? The right amount of body fat can be great for us hormonally, for our hunger signals, heck, even for feeling good, looking good. You know, sometimes when you lose too much fat in your face, it can age you. But the idea is, whatever your body composition goals, if you understand the difference between fat loss and weight loss, it's going to make this process much easier for you. So when we are losing body fat, what's happening is that fat reservoir in the fat cell is basically gone. The fat cell shrinks to the point where it's not even detectable, right? And that's when I basically don't have very much body fat. You know, I've tested under 6.5% body fat before. So it's quite a visually stunning look. It's not easy to get there, obviously, but the point is that I understood, okay, I'm losing fat at this point, and I want to explain why I know it's fat and not just something else. The next thing we want to talk about is muscle. Now, we all think of muscle as something that functions to allow us, our body to move, right? Every muscle in our body contracts, okay? That's what muscles do. So if I want to bring my hand closer to my body, I'm contracting the biceps. If I want to move my hand away from my body, I'm contracting the triceps, right? All the muscles in our body are basically going to contract to perform a function. What we can do, if we choose to, is provide a stimulus and change that muscle side. Now that's something that I've been pursuing my entire life. It's been a passion of mine, just getting in the gym, trying to figure out how to add muscle. Also, it's been something I've enjoyed changing for the benefits of performance. So like, when I was younger, I wanted to be able to dunk and throw a baseball 90 miles an hour. Muscle helped me do all those things and understanding that process, but I started to enjoy the process of changing my physique more than chasing the physique goals that were more around performance. But there's also something known as hypertrophy, right? You can hypertrophy a fat cell, make it grow, right? And then you store more fat and you weigh more, or you can hypertrophy a muscle cell. You can also hypertrophy your tendons and ligaments and some other things, but the focus right now is around the two things, muscle cells and fat cells. So if I were to decrease the size of my fat cells and basically make them not exist, right? They're just nothing, there's no reservoir in there, while also increasing the size or hypertrophy of my muscle cells, what would happen to the scale? You guessed it. Probably a lot of stability. We wouldn't necessarily see the scale change a whole lot. Well, what would that do for the psyche of someone? Some people will actually get in the mindset of like, wow, I'm not actually changing any. I'm putting all this effort in. I'm eating well. I'm training. I'm doing cardio. I'm paying attention to my diet. Nothing's happening on the scale. Well, this is why, as a coach, I don't focus on the scale, okay? Yes, I do track weight over time because as competitive bodybuilders, and I'm coaching competitors that are competing at the highest levels of the sport. In fact, I'll show you a picture here of Brian DaCosta, who was last year's overall World Natural Bodybuilding Federation bodybuilding champion. He is the best natural bodybuilder in the world right now. I also had 2 competitors place in the top 9 at the Olympia this year. So I coach people at a very high level, and the purpose of tracking weight, it's just another data point. At no point do I get obsessed with the scale. What I do get obsessed with are the visuals, right? Because when you can see visual changes happening, although it might be your brain telling you, well, if it's not being matched by the scale, nothing's happening, I promise you the visuals are much more impactful. And a third thing that I find to be very helpful is measurements, right? Because when you're losing inches, you're losing body fat. It's very easy to store body fat. In fact, it's quite easy to lose body fat. I would say it's easier for body fat to drop than it is for muscle to build. Muscle takes time. It's a rate limiting process. You have to go do some type of stimulus. I'll use weightlifting as an example. I lift some weights, I make sure my diet is in a good place, eating enough protein, carbs, and fats to rebuild that muscle. And over time, it's gonna incrementally just increase in size. And I'm talking very, very slowly. Okay, I've been a natural bodybuilder for over 30 years. And I'm not even be that impressive, but to compare to myself 30 years ago, I'm a completely different human being. I used to walk around in high school at 160, 170. Now I walk around at 220. So it's been 30 years of putting on lean body mass that's allowed me to get here. But if I get caught up in the day-to-day, the scale each day, it would basically be a standstill. So I want to talk about a couple other factors that are going to impact the scale, because a lot of people will get caught up and say, well, I started a new diet and I lost 7 pounds this week. And something you have to understand about muscle cells is that they store glycogen, what we commonly refer to as carbohydrates. When you ingest carbohydrates and you are doing something like resistance training or a sport or something that requires muscular activity, your body is going to store energy in your muscle cells to create ATP in the form of glycogen. Guess how it stores it? With water, okay? So you are actually going to be holding a lot of water in your muscle cells. Now, have you guys ever picked up a gallon of water? You ever feel how heavy that is? I believe a gallon of water weighs 12 or 13 pounds, if I remember correctly. So just think about picking up a gallon of water. Now, if you do something like a zero carb diet or keto or maybe even carnivore, you're not restoring those glycogen stores, okay? When you're eating no carbohydrates, your muscles are going to lose that glycogen, which is what? It's energy for us to perform. So you'll often hear people complain when they start a very low carb diet, they have brain fog and they have dropped performance in the gym, because we're losing our power. Our ATP is our power for working out. Well, what you also happen to do is all the water that is stored with that glycogen in your muscles, after a few days of very low carb or no carb dieting, you'll lose all that water, you'll lose all that glycogen. You haven't actually changed your body composition at all. You've decreased the size of some of your muscle cells because they're not storing, but the muscle cells are still the same. They're just not storing anything. It takes a while for muscle to atrophy. But it's exciting because you're seeing every single day the scale go down. But here's what's going to happen. Because you're not actually losing body fat, unless you're creating a caloric deficit, you're actually going to stall. You're going to see that scale drop, I don't know, 8, 7, 10 pounds in a week. and then it's not going to go anywhere unless you're creating a caloric deficit. The idea of creating a caloric deficit for fat loss is very different than weight loss, okay? When we're losing fat from fat cells, that body fat that is coming off is going to change our body composition for the better. When we are losing muscle volume, if I was to do a no-carb diet and these muscles are 80% water, 70 to 80%, just think how tiny the muscles are going to be. They're going to contract, right? They're going to get smaller because they're not filled out. They're not getting the stimulus, and they're not storing the glycogen and the water in them. So now you're going to look worse. Your body composition is technically worse, especially if you go get like a body fat composition test or a DEXA scan. You really want those muscle cells to be pushing out. The way I think of it with my athletes is you think of a balloon like you're blowing up like, one of those long skinny balloons. The fuller you fill that balloon with glycogen and water, the bigger it gets, right? That's what our muscle cells are doing, and they push out against the skin so you can see the muscle fibers pushing. If you deplete glycogen, if you deplete water, if you take a very low carb approach, which it's fine, but you just have to understand what's actually happening. You're not losing body fat necessarily, even if the scale is going down. So understanding that the difference between fat and weight loss is that our body is mostly water. Our body is, you look any textbook, these are some of the textbooks from studying at the University of South Florida exercise science program that I keep around. Anytime you look at them, we're 70 to 80% water in our bodies. So when you get on the scale and you lose weight, it's usually associated with that, okay? There's going to be a water change. Body fat has a rate limiting process. You can't lose pounds of body fat in a short amount of time. You can, however, lose pounds of water, dehydrating. There's also something that I like to discuss with my athletes and those of us that really are making an effort through exercise to lose more weight, and that is inflammation. Inflammation can be systemic. You can store water in your body, in your joints, all over the place. If you are stressed, if you are not getting enough sleep, or if you are overtraining, if you're over-exercising, if you feel stiffness and soreness in your joints, you get a little bit of edema. So I actually have had athletes who are leaner, have less body fat, but the scale goes up. Now this will mess with the head of a competitive bodybuilder. It will probably mess with the head of anybody who is in a weight loss program, but I promise you, if you take a day of recovery, let your body refresh, lose the inflammation that is associated with the effort and the training that you're putting into, get a good night's sleep, you're going to notice that that inflammation comes off because, again, it's body water. Okay, so the thing I want to really get across to you guys is that body fat is losing the inside of that fat cell, right, that reservoir. Weight is just whatever the scale says, and weight can be a complete kind of misnomer. There's a term called skinny fat for people that are actually at a body weight that should mean they have a good body composition, but because they've lost so much muscle along with losing the weight, they actually don't look good, and their skin will be loose, and they won't have a nice tone or touch to their physique, their skin, and their muscles. Okay, hopefully this clears things up, guys. Understanding that fat loss is losing the fat reservoir in your fat cells. You've got millions and millions of them, and for people that are overweight, they're larger and they have a lot less. They have a lot more to go to get rid of that. But that's kind of an exciting process as well, because you'll notice changes to your measurements. And body fat is all over the body. We know where our muscles are. They're kind of like, everybody knows the beach muscles, the chest, the pecs, the abs, but body fat can literally be in your face, in your ankles, in your knees. Like, obviously it covers our organs and stuff too, but you'll start to see changes all over your body, how clothes are fitting, your measurements. Take the waist measurement, take the thigh measurement, take the chest measurements. You can do the neck measurements. That can be just as motivating as seeing the scale go down. And in fact, I think it should be more motivating. All right, guys, hopefully this helps clear up the picture of fat loss and weight loss, and I hope you're having a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow.